Hi, and welcome to the Choose FI Foundation's Educational Speaker Series, where we take topics from the Choose FI Foundation's pre-K through 12 financial literacy curriculum and break it down with expert speakers in the area to bring a little bit more information and ideas to the topic. Hope you enjoy it.
Hey everyone, this is Rob Phelan. I'm here with Stephen Heptig, member of the U.S. Air Force. Stephen, how you doing?
Doing good.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Stephen is going to talk to us about basically the military and finances and how those things are intertwined. So how do finances change if you are thinking about going into the military? What are some things you need to consider? And then what are some of the major, I guess, pitfalls, traps, things to avoid as you go down that particular path? I know it's not something that I have a lot of knowledge about, so I'm really excited to talk to Stephen about this today. All right, so Stephen, let's start with just kind of like an overview of like someone wants to go into the military. What are their options? Like, what are the branches? What are their choices?
Yeah, so I'm an Air Force officer flying KC-10s out of New Jersey. And so that really is like my area of expertise, if you will, is my own experience. But I'll give you the best that I know across the rest of the spectrum, right? So you have the three main branches that you typically hear about, the Army, the Navy, and the U.S. Air Force. The Navy has a sub branch, which is the Marines, right? So typically we think of there being four military branches. The Air Force also just recently, within the last few months, got the Space Force, which is a real thing now. It's nested
Wow.
underneath the Air Force. So it's nested under the Air Force in the same way that the Marines are nested underneath the Navy. So they're going to have the same service secretary, but they're going to have their own uh, kind of ethos, if you will, right? Like their own flavor of things. And then you've got a few that people don't really normally think about. So you've got the U.S. Coast Guard, which used to be a little bit of a closer brother to the military services. It has been put under the Department of Homeland Security, but really like they interact with us in the same way that they used to. They have their own boats, their own uniforms, all that stuff. And then one that most people don't really think about as being one of the services is the Merchant Marine.
Hmm.
So that's it's a branch of the United States government that takes care of a lot of our national shipping. So things that are like really vital for the national government that needs to be so resupplying of the Navy, resupplying of locations around the world. I am not really familiar with that one, but I do know that they actually do have a service academy, so you can go in and be an officer in the Merchant Marine. So um, you just heard me mention that I'm an officer. I mentioned service academies. So there's two main ways to enter the military, no matter what branch you're going into, and that's officer or enlisted. And so it's just the way the military is a very old organization. They're structured in a way that's very hierarchical, pyramid type of an organization, and so the two options is if you want to come straight out of high school, then and you want to enlist in the military and do kind of a hands-on job. That is typically our enlisted force, which makes up the vast majority of the military. And then the bureaucratic kind of leadership type roles are typically the officer corps. You have to have a college degree to be an officer, and it takes a little bit more time to get in and get doing your job. There's a little bit more lead into that. Obviously, the 4 years or so to get your bachelor's degree, as well as one of the entry points, and that can be a few different things, which I'm sure we'll get into later as options. But
Oh,
in terms of covering all the different services, I do want to also bring up something that a lot of people don't think about, which is every service has what they call reserves. And so that's a whole different option that I think people who are looking at joining the military really should seriously consider. You've got your active duty, which is me, right? So every day I go to work Monday through Friday, sometimes Saturdays and Sundays. Like that is my job. Whereas the military also has a large group of people that are our kind of additional service members, but they have regular civilian jobs as well. They like wear two hats. So those reserve members for each of the branches have their own, including the Coast Guard. I don't know if the Merchant Marines have reserves, but I do know that the Coast Guard does. You you go through basic training, you go through your job training, and it's kind of full time for that period. So maybe 6-9 months a year of full time work for the military. And then you go back out to doing your civilian job. And you come in 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year is kind of the traditional mantra of a traditional reservist, right? And so in a month time period, you work a civilian job for the Monday through Friday, 4 weeks of the month. And then 1 weekend for 2 days out of that month, you're a military member. You put your military uniform on and go meet with your unit and do your work. And then every once in a while, they will, be deployed. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into that. But I do want to really emphasize that that's an option that a lot of people, I think, should look into. I think it's a really great option. It's those of us who are on active duty and have been on active duty for many, many years, we call it one of the best kept secrets in the military because nobody told us about that when we joined. We just dove in the deep end 2 feet first. And the people who joined the reserves from early on, we call them baby reservists, meaning they joined the military as a reservist. We're always a little jealous of those guys because I think that that's one of the best ways to do it. You get a lot of the benefits, but then you still have a lot of control over your life and your choices and get to do a civilian job as well.
That's cool. Because you're kind of teasing sort of the questions that we want to ask today. What's the difference between the two in terms of benefits, in terms of what your expected contributions are, and so on. I want to go back to the officer role first. So you said you have to have a college degree. Is this something that you have to go do on your own and then apply to the military, or is this that situation where like you can get college paid for by the military and then you're enlisted for a certain amount of time?
Right. So all of the above. Okay. So let's just take the officer route. The ways to become an officer are fourfold. There is a service academy for each military service, with the Marines being lumped in with the Navy. So there's an Air Force Academy. West Point is the Army Academy. You've got the U.S. Naval Academy. You've got, and then you've got the Merchant Marine Academy. Those are just like a traditional 4-year college. I say that with air quotes, saying that there's nothing traditional about it, other than you do go to classes for 4 years. It is like being in the military for 4 years while doing college. It is free in that, and not only free, you actually get paid a small amount while you're in there that increases each year. So you have joined the military. You are going to college for 4 years at the military school. You're taking traditional college classes. So I graduated the Air Force Academy with a Bachelor of Science in military history. And military history was only because I chose military history. So you can do, English, you can do economics, you can do political science. Like we have all of the traditional types of degrees that a 4-year university would have. But then you also take military classes, you do drills, you do some stuff that would definitely be abnormal in terms of like I did combat survival, living out in the woods for 3 weeks and learning that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit of a mix of both, right? So that's avenue one, totally free. But the way I like to explain it is you are not paying in dollars, but you are paying in blood, sweat, and tears, right? Like it's not free emotionally and sweat. So the second option is you go to a regular university. So like I also applied to Purdue and Texas A&M. So I would have gone to either Purdue or Texas A&M and joined their ROTC program, so Reserve Officer Training Corps. So that means just about every major university has an ROTC program. Some of them cover all of the services. So like Texas A&M has the Corps of Cadets, and they actually have ROTC program that kind of feeds all of the different services. However, Purdue was a Navy ROTC program. So I would have been joining the Navy ROTC, trying to get commissioned into the Navy. So that's something to consider, is like what university has what programs. You can cross commission, but there's some intricacies to that I honestly don't know because I didn't have to go through it. But so you're going to normal university, you're paying for a normal university. There are ROTC scholarships, and as you go along your 4 years, those ROTC scholarships can pay for more and more of it. So I know that One route would be you join ROTC as a freshman. You're mostly paying for your freshman year yourself through scholarships or just paying tuition. And then they might give you a little bit more for your sophomore year. And then your junior year, you go ahead and sign a contract saying, I'm committing to joining, the Navy afterwards. I'd like to be commissioned after my senior year. And the Navy ROTC says, great, we're going to pay for most of your junior and senior year. And then you would join afterwards, right? So that's the ROTC route. And then there's OTS, Officer Training School. So this is, I went to, Texas Tech or whatever it may be. I got a Bachelor of Science, and doesn't matter what, but I have the piece of paper. And then part of the way through my senior year, I never did ROTC. I'm like, you know what, the military is a really great option. Or even, let's say I go out into the workforce and I work as, something structural engineer or whatever for a year or two. And I'm like, man, I really want to do the military. I can apply to go into OTS and say, hey, I've already got my bachelor's. I just would like to be an officer. And you can get selected to go to officer training school, in which case you go to Maxwell Air Force Base for the Air Force. And you go through, 6 weeks or a 9-week program there. It's kind of like it's boot camp essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So boot camp for officers, you've already got your degree. You don't need to cover the college problem. And then you can enter that way. The fourth way is similar to officer training school, but very specific, and it's called direct commission. So that's where, let's say you go out and you become a doctor or you become a lawyer or something that's very specialized that the military has a hard time training. Like we have a hard time sending somebody to the Air Force Academy for 4 years to then go out and do doctor type training, medical training for, however long it takes to do residency and all that stuff. The military will go out and say, hey, you're a brain surgeon. We need brain surgeons in the military. We will offer you a direct commission to come in. And that's a whole specialized program. So that's a little bit more specific to some of those long lead-in type degrees and specialties. So those are the 4 main ways to join as an officer.
Okay. And then another major branch in your decision-making tree is which branch do you go down? So what are the differences between Army, Air Force, Navy, and we'll say Marines is its own thing, but you're saying it comes under Navy.
Yeah, from that perspective, like which branch do I want to join? The Marines definitely is a very different thing. They have their own boot camp, they have their own ethos, their own feeling, and that is hard to really put a fine point on. Like, how do you choose which one? I think that for me, if I were to go back and do it again, or even just thinking about kind of how I decided about it, it really came down to what job do I want to do. And so I think that, really researching like what interests me. Like, do I want to be an infantry soldier, right? So do I want to learn to live in the wild, carry a rifle, be a part of, a small team of guys who is learning how to just kind of do like the traditional military rifleman type job? Do I want to learn how to do intelligence? Do I want to, be looking at huge pieces of satellite imagery and poring over them and trying to pick out, what pixel is a tree and what pixel is a truck? Do I want to learn how to deal with coding and cyber and that type of thing, right? So by picking one of those jobs that like really interests you is not going to hardly ever will it narrow down to one service, right? If you want to be an infantryman, then generally speaking, right, you should kind of seriously consider the Army or the Marines. Those are the two that like specialize in that, right? If you want to do like hardcore cyber, talking to satellites type coding, that kind of stuff, then the Air Force or the Navy specialize in those types of things. If you want, now I mentioned intelligence, that kind of covers the gamut, right? That covers all 4 of them. But generally speaking, I would say think about like what area interests you and like big picture area interests you. Are you an outdoorsy type person? Do you like computers? Do you like, so for me, right, flying airplanes. So I narrowed it down to like, I want to fly airplanes. That's what I'm joining the military to do. My 2 choices were the Air Force and the Navy. The Army has a very few airplanes, mostly helicopters, and that didn't interest me, right?
Mhm.
So I knew going in, I applied to the Air Force Academy and the Naval Academy. I didn't even apply to West Point or the Merchant Marine Academy. So that kind of helped make my decision, right? And to be completely truthful, for me, I got a rejection letter from the Air Force Academy. I got an acceptance letter from Purdue for Navy ROTC. And I already had my room, the down payment on my room assignment at Purdue. And I thought, okay, like I'm going to be in the Navy. I know that it's a small shot that I will be flying airplanes because the Navy has a lot less airplanes than the Air Force. So I might be driving a boat for my life. I don't know, but like I'm going to stick with my plan of trying to go fly airplanes, and the Navy is the one that's going to give me a shot at that. At the very last minute, I got accepted to the Air Force Academy, and I had to make a choice. Like, let's say 2% of the Navy flies airplanes and 20% of the Air Force flies airplanes. So like that made my choice for me. Like, cool, I'm going to the Air Force because I want to fly airplanes, and my highest chance of doing it, that is there. And so I think that really is how I made that decision, and it might be a strong factor for other people making it. Also consider there is a little bit different type of lifestyle in each service, and for that you would really have to ask each member, right? Like I would only be able to honestly give you the Air Force type of lifestyle that I live, with a little flavor of the Navy because I was an exchange student with them for a year. But even then, right? Like I would say I was an exchange student as an Air Force pilot student with the Navy pilot guys. Like if you want to join the Navy, like go find somebody who has been in the Navy, even if it's the past, right? Like those ethos are long term, they're long arcs. So speak with somebody in each service that you are considering.
That's great career advice in general. Like if you're considering a career, go find somebody who's doing that career already and say, hey, tell me a little bit about it. Can I shadow you? What's your best advice for getting into this particular career? Like, is it a 4-year degree? Is it going down an experience route? Like whatever it is, like it's just solid advice. Now you mentioned you got like, there's an application process and it's possible to get rejected. I didn't realize that. I thought like anybody could pretty much join a military service if they wanted to.
Anybody can join the military service. I got rejected so the academies are very, what's the word I'm looking for? They do not take that many people. Yeah. They're very, they have a very low selection rate, in the neighborhood of like a Harvard, Yale type Ivy League school, because it's free college, right? So it's a great way to get your college paid for. So in general, each year, they take about 1,000 people at each academy. So it's about 4,000 people total for all 4 years of students. They take about 1,000 people, and they usually get in the neighborhood of 20 to 23, 25,000 applications, if I remember my numbers correctly, which that was 14 years ago. But so you have to be aggressive, and it's a long process. I mean, like they weed out a lot of those 25,000 people through sheer paperwork and bureaucracy. You have to really stick with it. Whereas ROTC, they commission a lot more people out of ROTC.
So you're applying to go to the academy where you're getting college at that particular academy. It's free, it's 4 years, and then you're in. So versus like going into an ROTC program, completely different application process.
Yes, yeah,
so
completely different application, and you don't have to apply to that process prior to going to that school, right? So you can be a freshman at a college and say, "This, like, I see people walking around in these nerdy uniforms on campus. Like, I think I might want to try that." And you can go join them, as a freshman, as a sophomore. It becomes essentially one of your classes.
Okay, cool. All right, so then let's talk about what it takes to be in that, I guess that top, you said it's 1 in 20 pretty much. You're talking about the top 5% to get accepted. Do you just need a good high school GPA? Like, do they care about GPA when it comes to military? Like, what are they looking for?
Okay, so for the service academies, yes, they do care about GPA. They care about it. It is, think of it as applying to a top tier university. Like if it's a university that's, in the top 5 or 10% of the yearly college rankings, it's almost the same type of mentality that you need to have, right? So there's a few extra things, there's a few nuances and differences, but generally speaking, while you're in high school, you should be doing some of the same stuff of having excellent grades, having sports, having extracurricular activities, having volunteer activities. So all of the traditional things that you would think of that a high school college admissions counselor would tell you to do apply. There's a few nuances in that you have to go through a selection process with your senator and get a senator's endorsement to go to a service academy. You have to do a medical board, all of that kind of stuff. But that really only applies specifically to if you want to go to a service academy. And I'll tell you, there's books out there. So and I don't remember the name of it, and I definitely don't have it anymore, but if you were to Google or go to Barnes and Nobles, there is every year a book that is published about what you need to do to get into the 4 service academies. If you are interested in doing it, I would say go buy that book. It's yay big, 120 or so pages, and it tells you these kinds of things because there's a lot of boxes you need to check.
So maybe let's see if we can find that after, put in the link
Yeah.
to the video or something like that. That'll be cool.
I will.
All right. So
that covers the officer side, right? I do want to speak to the enlisted side.
Yeah.
So first off, you and I both mentioned that it is great to go talk to somebody in the field that you want to join, right? With the military, I'm going to make one caveat. That person that you talk to should not be a recruiter, right? It should be somebody who legitimately and I don't mean legitimately served. I was about to say legitimately served in those jobs. Recruiters come from the service force. They did like a regular job before that, but they have an incentive to get you into the military, right? And so they're going to tell you all of the rosy, good sides of things, but there is a non-rosy side of things, right? Like the reason that less than 1% of the American population is in the military is because there's some hardship that comes with that as well. And you should hear about that ahead of time. You should just hear the realities of what it's like to deploy and what it's like to go to combat if you have to do that, and those kinds of things that you really should think about before you join. It's not all about like what's the paycheck and the college benefits and that kind of thing. And so go find somebody that's not a recruiter, that served in that branch, and do that. For the enlisted side, all the stuff that I just talked about for the officers does not necessarily apply for the enlisted. So it's very different. You're going to talk to a recruiter. You're going to take a test that's called the ASVAB. I forgot what it stands for, but if you Google ASVAB, it comes up immediately, right? So every enlisted member has to take the ASVAB, and you do want to think about that. It's kind of like the SATs, right? Like that ASVAB score is going to determine what you can do in the military and what that recruiter can offer you. So there's a few quick things. I was never enlisted, and so I didn't have to go through this process. So I'm going to fire off a few things to think about. So if you're watching this video and you want to consider enlisting, follow up on all these questions. So 1, you have to take the ASVAB, and that score determines your job. 2, you can get committed to a job prior to joining the military. It doesn't happen for everybody. I would tell you that if a recruiter tells you that you're going to go in and do a certain job, unless it is written on paper with a signature, it doesn't matter. It's a worthless promise unless it is signed in paper for real. So consider that. 2, like I said, you can join active duty or you can join reserves. As a reservist, you'll still go through the boot camp, but then the path after that will look a little bit different. There's a third option that you should think about. So a lot of the states have National Guard forces. So Army, National Guard, and Air National Guard. That's kind of like being a reservist in that you do 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year, but you actually work for the state governor. And then you could be activated as a federal force. That's a whole bunch of complicated words I just used. But what's really important is that it's similar to reservist, but a little bit different flavor. If you want to do that, you want to speak to a reserve recruiter or an Air National Guard recruiter. They're different recruiters. So let's say I decided I wanted to be in the Air Force as enlisted. I would go talk to an active duty enlisted recruiter and a reservist recruiter, and then my state, whatever state I was in, right? So I'm in Pennsylvania right now. So I would go find a Pennsylvania Air National Guard recruiter and talk to them as well. So there's 3 people with each service that you can talk to about like kind of different versions of that military branch that you can join.
And then also find somebody who's not a recruiter in each of those to get
Right.
the maybe the not so pretty side of the job. So the recruiter, yeah, their job is to get you in, to convince you this is the right thing to do. And you think of that with any type of person who is working in a sales position. You know, the aim of the job is to make the sale or to get the person in. So yeah, you want to get at least a second opinion, a different perspective, and try and find someone who's in a different position to get that perspective.
Yeah.
All right, love that. All right, so now let's switch to finances a little bit, because that is kind of the flavor for this as well. So I guess the stereotype for me would have been that the military was a low-paying career. Is that true?
It covers low to high.
Okay.
So first off, I will say the military pay scales are public information. So you can literally Google military pay scales and you'll have a whole bunch of different options coming. So Google whatever year it is, right? So 2020 military pay scales, you're going to get a PDF document and there's going to be E's and O's, right? So there's going to be a side of the chart that goes E1 to E9, which is your enlisted ranks, right? And then O1 to O, whatever it is, 10. And so I am an Air Force major, so I'm an O4. And so you can see, anybody can see how much I make. You go to the O4 sign, you slide over to like roughly how many years I've been in, and that's how much my paycheck is. And so it doesn't have to be a guessing game. So go look at the differences. Look at the differences in terms of like, if I stay in for 6 years, you know, and I know that not everybody kind of knows the military thing, but just as an average for the first few chunks on both enlisted and officer, just say that you're going to jump in rank like roughly every 2 to 3 years. Okay. So if you say, how much money would I make if I was in 6 years? I would go to maybe E3 or 4 to the 6-year mark. And I would say, okay, like that's roughly how much money I'll make at that. Versus what if I was an officer? What if I went through the 4 years? And so really, 6 years in, if I do 4 years of college first, right, I'm going to go to maybe still the first rank or maybe O1, maybe O2, and the 2-year mark, right? Because I did 4 years with the college ahead of time. And compare that to the E3, E4 at the 6-year mark, and you'll see, okay, like this is roughly the difference between enlisted and officer. And so the enlisted members, they do start out fairly low, right? But you've got to remember that the military provides a lot of stuff for those members. And so, yeah, your paycheck may only be making, as a brand new out of boot camp enlisted guy, may only be making $22,000 a year, which sounds very low, but your housing is taken care of because you're living in the dorms. Mm-hmm. Your food is taken care of because you're eating at the chow hall and have a food card, right? And so there's a whole bunch of benefits that you have to take into account. And so, yeah, you may only be making 20 a year, but then that 20 a year minus taxes may be mostly coming to you, not going to housing and food. And we say, you know, housing, food, and transportation are the big three. So if you're living on base, right? Like I see a bunch of guys, but not as many as there should be, riding their bikes from the dorms to their work building, right? Like it's probably 2 football fields distance away. But then, you know, there are guys who are riding their bikes and there are guys who have a 2019 Ford Mustang, and that Ford Mustang sits in the parking lot of the dorm building and the work building for 90% of the day, right? So you have some really powerful tools to do some really cool stuff, even as a young enlisted guy who might be making on the lower end of the pay scales. But then when you start to get up to the higher end of the pay scales, your 10 years or 12 years plus, both on the enlisted and the officer side, you know, you're making quite a bit more. The officer side, you can make quite a bit more than that when you add bonuses like aviation bonuses. I know we'll talk about that later, but the officer side has some pretty solid money making potential.
Gotcha.
Similar to any, you know, electrical engineer, any, you know, solid, significant, like 4-year math, science type degree, STEM type degree out of a 4-year college, your earning potential is pretty large the longer you stay in. So.
Okay, so that's good. And I really like the point you made about the benefits having, you need to consider those. And that's true of any job, that the benefits that come with the job, while it may not be written as a number on your pay, like you have to really consider that as like your total compensation from a job.
Yeah.
Teaching kind of falls into the same thing. Like people will say, oh, well, teaching doesn't have a traditionally very high salary. But when you look at the healthcare benefits, the pension that goes with it, the access to different retirement accounts, like there's actually, there's quite good compensation in being a teacher when you put all of those things together. Versus say like, you could be working for yourself. So you are an entrepreneur, you're a business owner, and you are responsible for everything. So you may make more, but you are paying out all of these different costs as well. So yeah, you have to consider where the balance is. All right. So let's see, I want to go into, actually one question that came up was, how long do you stay in the military for? Like what's the average? And if you do this, let the military help pay for college, what's the trade-off, I guess, in that sense? That's a pretty big question we should be answering.
Yeah, and I'll go through this pretty quickly. The traditional time that you hear about for the military to get retirement benefits is 20 years. It's just hard and fast 20 years. As an officer, I am going to sign a contract based on the type of education I'm getting. So all of the members that come out of the academy have a 5-year commitment. I don't remember what it is for OTC, honestly. I think it's in the same neighborhood of 4 or 5 years. But so if the military paid for your college education, you've likely got 5 years. I then went to pilot training, which added another 5 years. So I have a 10-year contract that I have to fulfill. On the enlisted side, you're going to sign an enlistment for a certain period of time. And that can be anywhere from 2 to 6 years. So I don't know if they do 2 years anymore. I think most of them are typically 3 or 6. So 3, 4, and 6 is the contracts that you will typically see for an enlistment. And you get benefits for signing a longer enlistment, right? So if you sign a 3-year enlistment, they might say, okay, great, we'd love to have you. If you sign a 6-year enlistment, then they may give you some bonuses. They may start you out at the next higher rank. So instead of coming in as an E1, you may come in as an E2 and skip that. I think it's like 9 months typically to go from an E1 to E2. So you got like a 9-month head start on that pay raise. You might get the job or they may say, we can give you the job you specifically want, but we've got to train you for it. So we want you for longer. So you got to sign a 4 or a 6, things like that. So typically if I were to finish my 10 years and leave, I don't get the retirement benefits. I don't get the medical benefits after I leave. Same thing for the enlisted contracts. Some of the important things to remember are education benefits. If you want education benefits after you leave the military, which is called the GI Bill, we are working on the post 9/11 GI Bill for anyone who signs up at this point. That first triggers at 90 days of active duty service to get 40% of that, but you get the full benefit at 3 years. So typically speaking, you would want to stay in 3 years if you're looking for education benefits, either for yourself or even for your dependents.
Okay, so that it helps cover the cost of education for you or your dependents if you stay in at least 3 years?
Yeah. So let's shift then into education benefits, because I know that's a big question. So education benefits, the first one would be, like I said, service academy, you're getting a 4-year degree while you're there. ROTC, getting a 4-year degree while you're there. Enlisted, you don't necessarily need any college beforehand. So if you go in as enlisted or as an officer while you're in the military, all of the military services have great benefits called Tuition Assistance Program, TAP. Now, each service has a little bit different rules, but in general, most of them say while you're in the military, we will pay for $250 of a credit hour per credit hour up to, I think I wrote it down here, up to $4,500 a year. And so essentially you can go to school while you're in the military and the military will pay for it. Okay, so separate from that is the GI Bill, which I just talked about. So the tuition assistance program is your service and it's being paid for by your service. So the Air Force is paying for me to go to additional schooling to get my master's degree or whatever, get your college degree, a 2-year, anything that you want. After I get out, the Veterans Administration is the one who pays for your GI Bill. And that was originally back in World War II. They had all the World War II soldiers coming home and they wanted to get them into colleges, get them educated, and then back out into the workforce. So that's where that originated, but it's gone through several different iterations. So like I said, right now, if you're looking it up, if you join right now, you'll be under the post 9/11 GI Bill, meaning you've served for 3 years. You come out, there's some weird calculations. They pay for 36 months worth of schooling. It's essentially 4 years. It's roughly 8 semesters. They're going to pay for you to go to a public university, or if you choose a private university, I think it's up to $19,000 a year worth. But the interesting thing is they're paying for you to go to school. They're paying for your housing while you're in school, and they're paying for a stipend for your books, right? So it's a pretty significant benefit.
And you're not currently in the military, like active duty in the military at that point.
Right. So this is intended for you've left the military and you've gone back to school to get a new skill and then go back out in the workforce, right? But they allow you to tweak that. So you can say, let's say you're in the military, you're going to get, an expensive degree, right? So it's going to be way more than that $4,500 a year that the tuition assistance program is going to pay. So your actual service is going to pay for them. Either you can pay for it out of pocket, or you can say, I want to use part of my GI Bill, what's called the top-up program. And so that GI Bill is going to pay for like the difference. Now, the problem there is, right, like the military is already paying you for housing, so you're not going to get your housing stipends. You're giving up a little bit. You're saying, yeah, like, okay, I want to use it now because I'm doing it now. The Air Force is paying for part of it. I'm going to let the GI Bill top up so I don't have to pay any money out of pocket, and I'm just going to forego, the book stipend and the housing allowance. Another option is, and I have chosen to do this, right, like when I get out of the military, I don't expect to go back to school because I've got my pilot's license. I'm going to go hopefully fly for an airline. I've kind of got my career path set up, right? And so I have chosen to move that benefit to one of my dependents. And your dependents can either be a spouse or your kids. So I incurred a little bit of a contract for that. So I actually had to sign a 4-year contract for doing that. But that contract runs concurrently with my 10 years, so I didn't really care. So I have said, hey, I am going to transfer, I think I transferred 99% of my benefits to my wife. And once I transfer it to a dependent, I can move it between my dependents. So I actually don't expect my wife to use it. I expect my future kids to use it. And so I'll probably split it between them. And so, yeah, there is some ways where you can use that benefit for you. You can apply it to your wife or your kids, which is pretty awesome.
That is very awesome. Yeah. Okay. So I like that we're in the benefits conversation. So we've kind of covered education benefits. You also mentioned that if you stay in for 20 years in the military, you get retirement and healthcare benefits. Is this retirement like a pension, or retirement like you've been contributing to like a 401k, 403b sort of thing? What is it?
Both.
Okay.
For anybody who hasn't joined the military yet and will be joining, out of high school watching this video, you are going to go into the blended retirement system, meaning you're going to get both. So you're going to get a pension style. The military will send you a check every month. They're going to pay for your benefits from the month after you get out at 20 years of active duty service until you die. You'll get a paycheck from the military. You'll get medical benefits. But then they have transitioned to, if you've talked about 401ks and 403bs with your students, you'll also have a similar program called the TSP. So the government, every month for your 20 years, if you have put in some money, they have also put in some money to match. So there is a government match into our TSPs. It's up to 5%. And so you will also leave the military with that TSP that is your money, and you can decide how to either live off on it, let it grow, similar to just a traditional, retirement savings investment. So you'll have both.
And you still have access to an IRA, I'm assuming.
You still have access to an IRA. And so so for me, I do an IRA for myself, an IRA for my wife, which can be either traditional or Roth. Then we have the TSP, which we put money into. And then the government also puts a little bit of money into the TSP. Since I put over 5%, they match up to that 5%.
Okay. And then, so if you get to 20 years and you are getting just the pension part of it, is that a significant amount of money? Like, could somebody, conceivably you go into the military at 18, you're done by 38. Like, could you just retire at that point? Like, would you make enough money to retire, or do you typically have to have a second career?
Most people have a second career.
Okay.
However, I would say that here at the Choose a 5 Foundation, like, that's one of the things we're trying to change. We're trying to show people you don't need to have a second career. So the old calculation, when it was just the pension style, it was 50%. So half of your paycheck, half of your last highest earning 3 years average, you got 50% of that every month for in perpetuity. Now, and that was based off of a multiplier per year of 2.5. So now the blended retirement system is a 2.0. So it's a little bit lower. So it's a roughly, like, a way to think about it is 40%. So you're going to get 40% in terms of a pension paycheck plus all of, hopefully, this big pile of investment savings that you have in your TSP. And so you'll get a check every month for 40%. So it's absolutely enough, especially, with 5 principles. Like you're talking about, like trying to keep your expenses low, being able to be flexible and agile with low expenses. It's absolutely enough money that you could live off of it and sit on a beach for the rest of your life. Now, most people don't, right? Like most people have something else that they do. They are bringing in a little bit of money. But I think that doing 20 years in the military, being a prudent saver and not even an aggressive saver, right? Like just being a moderate saver. Let's say you only put in 5%. I think 5% is definitely, like, in the realm of 5. We would consider, like, that should be fairly easy to do, even by just kind of attacking your expenses. That 5% will get you an additional 5% of match. So you're putting in 10% of your income equivalent for 20 years. You would not have to do a second career if you did not choose to.
Yeah, like you wouldn't be like a multimillionaire in terms of like income, but you would certainly have enough that you could live off, especially since you've been used to living off of that income all the way up to that 20 years. All right.
Yeah.
So still staying in the financial side of things, you start in the military. You've already said you get a housing allowance, you get some food allowances. What are the other kind of major budget differences that we need to think about? So maybe, your income's lower, but there are a lot of things coming in. Like what is the difference, like financially? What do we have to plan for, say, for the next 5 years after leaving high school for going military?
Yeah. So housing allowance is a big one. And housing allowance is going to depend upon where you live. It's based off of your zip code. So as a young enlisted guy, you're going to have to live in the dorms. So they require you to live in the dorms typically for your first 3 or 4 years as an enlisted guy, or until you get married. So that housing, like, you're not going to get that housing allowance, but you're living for free in the dorms, and you have access to usually a very nice gym. You have access to all the services on base, right? So the outdoor rec center, that type of thing. You also are going to either get a food allowance, or you're going to have access to the chow hall. So again, you're either not paying for food, or you get an allowance, and you can kind of choose to do with as you wish. So after your first few years as an enlisted guy, or right away as an officer, you then get to make a choice, right? And so this is where I think, like, the military has a really cool benefit. So my housing allowance is set for my zip code here. I can choose to live in base housing, which is not a dorm, but an actual no-kidding house. So it's like neighborhoods, like full neighborhoods with elementary and middle school on the military base. I can choose to live in that housing and give up all of my housing allowance, in which case I get usually a pretty nice house. So I think that me as a captain and a major would typically qualify for like a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1 or 2 garage type house, right? A lot of the kind of middle enlisted younger officer housing is a duplex, like maybe a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom duplex type house. So the things to think about there, right? Like, you're not paying for utilities. So if you want to leave I don't suggest this, but if you want to leave your windows open and your heater on 90 during the winter in New Jersey, you can do it. Not going to cost you anything. Bad environmental choices, but you could do it, right? You're not, unless you have a fence that closes your yard in. So most of them actually are kind of like an unfenced yard. And there's huge green spaces, right? So you're living on like beautiful, huge green spaces, almost kind of like living on a golf course without the golf course there a lot of times. At least that's what you're going to see for the military, or sorry, for the Air Force. You don't have to worry about mowing, right? Like, they're going to come in and mow it for you. You are living essentially in a gated community. So you are living behind Air Force security forces checking every ID coming in at the front gate. So there's some benefits there, right? I have chosen not to live on base at any point because they've given me, let's say they give me $1,800 to live here in New Jersey. I can choose, I don't have to prove that I have an $1,800 rent. they just give me $1,800, right?
Gotcha,
So I
gotcha.
have always tried to live like somewhere in the 50 to 60% of my housing. I've always tried to pocket some of my housing. And so when I first moved here, I lived in an apartment that was a 1-bedroom apartment for like $1,000, and I just pocketed the rest of that as savings. We live now in a house that is actually a little bit smaller than probably what I would qualify for on base, but we love our little townhouse here in Philadelphia, and I'm pocketing $500 every month, that I can do with as I choose. I choose to just put it in retirement. So there are some different ways to deal with that.
Mhm.
And I think that, the housing is different per base and per service. So there's some bases, some Air Force bases I would not want to live in the base housing. And the nice thing is you get that choice.
Very cool. So like from what I'm hearing, what cost do you actually have as like a new recruit coming in, either officer or enlist? Like it sounds like your major stuff's taken care of. You're living on a base where you've got access to entertainment and amenities that like maybe you would be looking for on a regular basis. Like what are you actually paying for?
Right. So you're paying for your car. You're paying for any food that you're not getting at the chow hall, and you're paying for a cell phone, and you're paying for then all of your typical stuff like fun activities. Right. You should be able. So you're living for free in the dorms, or you're getting a housing allowance. You are getting enlisted guys are getting an allowance for their uniforms. So you do have to buy uniforms. We have to buy our own uniforms every once in a while. So they give you an allowance once a year for that. You are getting free access to the gym. You are getting some really cheap access to outdoor activities, right? So I think that like when I lived in California, we could go skiing, or when I lived in Colorado and we can go skiing up the mountains, right? I think I could rent ski gear. Now this was, again, it was a while ago, it was 10 years ago, but I could rent ski gear for the entire season, I think for like $60, right? So from the outdoor rec center. So yeah, it's a little bit of an expense, but super cheap. So generally speaking, it's your like disposable income type expenses, right? Cell phone, the clothes you're buying for civilian wear, going out and partying, and your car. Those are probably your big expenses.
Okay, so like, and you mentioned that if you're staying on base, 99% of the time, like you don't really need a car. You could bike to most of these things, and I'm assuming if you left base that you could still get access to something like an Uber or Lyft or whatever it is. Like you wouldn't necessarily need to have a car. So yeah, if you could really think about your expenses in a different way for those first couple of years at least, so maybe while you're young, free, single, you don't have other responsibilities. Like even if you're on that lower $20,000 a year wage, like you could pretty much pocket most of that and save it, right?
Yeah. So we see people from the whole spectrum, right? Like I see some guys who really struggle to make ends meet. Honestly, it's unfortunate. There are food pantries on most military bases because we know that there are some people that struggle to make ends meet. I also have an airman that works in my office that I think that he's probably in the, if I had to guess, $24,000 to $26,000 range.
Mm-hmm.
He is living off base in a moderate house with 3 guys. Three of them total. He's paying off in 2019. He paid $18,000 of student loans off, living off of like 24, 26, right? So it's totally doable. He had college. He actually has completed college before he came in, and he decided to go enlisted because that's just what he wanted to do. And he has some big student loans. So it's totally possible, right? Like if he didn't have student loans, he could be almost completely filling up his TSP maximum allotment of 19,000, right? By making 24, 26. So I think he's a great example of you have a lot of flexibility, even as a young guy, not making all that much because your essentials are taken care of.
Okay. Am I right in saying that if you are sent abroad, so you're active duty and you're sent out, that pretty much all your expenses are covered? And do you actually receive your income, or does it come into like a U.S. account and you don't really touch until you get back, or how does that work?
Yeah. So if you are
Deployed was the word I was looking for.
Yeah, right. So if you're deployed, or TDY, which is temporary duty, so you are traveling like for work temporarily, whether it's to a combat zone or just to training or something outside the States, then yes, you're going to get a little bit of extra money for traveling.
Okay.
And then you do get paid normally. You are going to get that into your normal accounts. And so, I've deployed several times. Two of those times were for 6 months. One of those times I packed all my stuff up and I put it in a storage unit and I got rid of my house, right? So I didn't have rent for that 6 months, but I was still getting my housing allowance. And then other times I've stayed in my house because it was just too much hassle. But yeah, you definitely don't spend as much money. You try and so we can still get mail out there. You can still order Amazon. It's not 2 days, obviously. It usually takes like about 2 weeks to get it, but they get it to you. So, you try and keep your Amazon shopping to a minimum, which can sometimes be hard to do when you're bored out there for 6 months. But in general, you are not spending nearly as much money because exactly, you're going to the Chow Hall. You are living on some military base overseas. Typically, you can't really leave that military base depending on what part of the world you're in.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you're not spending a whole lot of money. It's actually a time which a lot of guys save a lot of money or pay off a lot of debt or whatever.
Is it tax-free income when you're deployed?
Only if you are in a specific combat zone. So it's a zone called a CZTE, Combat Zone Tax Exemption. And if you were to Google that, there's a list of them that I believe the IRS maintains. But generally speaking, it's the Middle East. So every time I go to the Middle East, yes, that month is tax-free. So like, let's say I went there today, so May 11th, and then I came back on, June 3rd. I would get May and June tax-free. And so on my actual pay stub, you would see they would return the federal. So you still pay Social Security and FICA, but they would take the income tax would be free. They would return it to you. And then at the end of the year, there's some things you do on your tax return to let them know that's, you get a specific code in your W-2 that lets the IRS know, yes, he was in the tax-free zone. Cool. It's a huge benefit, right? So, yep. I mean, it can be several $100s. So for a young enlisted guy, yeah, my job deploys fairly regularly, usually 2 or 3 times a year. And so there's some guys who, they're doubling their income almost on the years when they deploy a lot. It sucks to deploy, but it's actually a nice benefit of those years when you might deploy a lot and be away from family. Your income could, as a young guy, almost double because of those taxes coming back to you.
It's awesome. All right. We're almost there. What are the biggest mistakes that you're seeing recruits make? So you're talking about food pantries on base. Like, why? What are they doing differently that is causing this problem? Like, is it just the same sort of lifestyle inflation that we see with the average community, or is there something different that is happening within like military communities that maybe we're not recognizing?
Yeah, no, I think it's a little bit of both. So I think that, like, one, the military it's a slice of America. And so generally speaking, you and I both know, like, this is why we do what we do, is because we are not teaching these skills in school. And so your average person is coming, me included, right? Like, I don't know your history, but like, I came out of high school not knowing how to deal with money. And same. I drove myself to a $0 checking account one day with credit cards maxed out, right? And that was like my bottom. And I said, like, I have to do something differently. And unfortunately, these, most of the guys joining the military, both officer and enlisted, are not doing much better because we're not teaching them. So I would say that's the majority of it. Now, you get into the military, right? There's a little bit of some magnifying forces in the military. One, you're coming in, you are living in the dorms with a whole bunch of other guys. You may not have gone to college, right? So kind of trying to figure out like what life looks like, what it looks like to have a checkbook and a cell phone that you're paying yourself and going out and buying food and that kind of stuff. But then also you may go on deployment, right? Because we're going to get you working pretty quickly, and most of the military is deploying at this point, at least at some point. So let's say you go on a deployment. You're gone for 3 or 4 months. You're not spending hardly any money. You're having a good time on deployment and making extra money, right? It's all going into your bank account. And then you come home and you've been kind of cooped up and, living life on the edge a little bit, right? You're in combat. And so you want to go have some fun. And one of the common things is to go buy a sports car, right? And So you see your friends doing it, you see your buddies doing it, and it's like, I'm either don't have a car or I'm driving like this 1999 Honda Civic, and all my buddies got 2009 Chargers, Challengers, and Ford Mustangs. So there's some really strong pressures to keep up with your friends and buddies and peers. So I think that has a lot to do with it. So I think having a plan, right? Having a money plan, one, understanding how money works, two, having a plan and goals. And so the guys that I see that have been really successful, like I said, the kid who paid off 18,000, like he drives a car that I am pretty sure is just leaving a trail of gasoline everywhere he goes. Like it is a rust bucket. But you know what? Like one, he is a good mechanic. And so he works on all of his own cars, right? So he's always fixing it up and working on it. But he just knows. He's told me, he's like, I don't care what my car looks like, right? Like it runs. I keep it running and it gets me everywhere I need it to go. And it doesn't cost me any money because I paid whatever, $800 cash for it. It's an old Jeep and he loves it. He's not going to beat any Ford Mustang, racing out of base, which has a 25 mile an hour speed limit. But he is paying off 18 grand a year instead of using the food bank, the take one, leave one food cans type stations that are around base. And so I think having, understanding how money works, having a plan and setting goals as to like what you're doing with that extra money is really the huge difference between those two people.
Yeah, and we're going to have a couple other episodes about this as well, but the idea of social norms, peer pressure, the people you choose to surround yourself with, the environment you place yourself in, these are all going to have impacts on your mentality when it comes to money. And the scary part is you may or may not see it happening. Right. So like if you're living in close quarters with a lot of people who, they're straight out of high school, they've suddenly got some money to spend and they're spending it. It's really hard to be that person sometimes who's like, you know what, I'm not going out tonight. I'm going to save it, or I'm going to choose to drive that kind of older car because you know what, by having that older car, I don't have a $300, $400 a month car payment. So like that's going to future me. And it's going to take you being that strong person to realize, okay, what do I need to do in order to protect my future self? And it could be something like what Stephen suggested. Maybe you say, you know what, I'm not going to stay on base. So once the dorms requirements over, maybe I'm going to relocate off base and surround myself with people who are more aligned with what I am. Or the guy you were talking about, living off base, but with 3 other guys. Maybe there are 3 other guys who are also equally, we're trying to save money, we're trying to live frugally, we're trying to build for something better in the future. And if the closest people to you have the same mindset as you, you're going to find it a lot easier to stick to your guns when it comes to those hard decisions and saying no.
Yeah. There's a story that I always makes me chuckle. So there's 2 young guys that we have in our unit, and one of them actually is from New Jersey here. And so his parents live here, and his parents have done very well for themselves since they have a really large house here in New Jersey. And I found out that him and one of his buddies were both living in his parents' basement.
Nice.
And so he was not paying any rent, and then the buddy, I think, was paying like $200 a month rent. And here, so New Jersey, our base is one of the highest housing allowances because housing is so expensive up here in the Northeast, right? And so he was paying I think his buddy was paying like $200 a month, I think, to live in his buddy's parents' basement. We all always had a good chuckle about it, right? But then 2 or 3 years later, come to find out, this guy was getting out of the military. He'd done his 4 years, I think. And he was, most people kind of know me as I'm interested in money. And so he and I were chatting one day, and come to find out, he owned part of a plumbing business now from back where he grew up. And I was like, that's really interesting. How did you get into that? He's like, well, I've been saving my money living in these guys' parents' basement. And one of my buddies from high school bought out a plumbing business there and needed help to buy it out. And so I'm a silent partner in it. And wow. I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, you know what? I make more money just from the cash flow of the plumbing business that he doesn't do anything for every day than in the Air Force. And he's like, I'm trying to decide, do I need to re-enlist and sign up for the Air Force, or should I go back and start being an operations manager for this plumbing company? And I'm like, that is it, man. That we chuckled at you, me included, right? Living in because the other guy was kind of a funny guy that we always like to give a hard time, and he's living in his parents' basement. But then this kid was living with them, and they each had their own rooms. There was multiple rooms and bathrooms in the basement. So But I was like, at the end of that, I was like, you know what? Like, that kid got it. He did not care where he lived. He was comfortable. Most of the time we made fun of them because they would come to work with lunches made because his friend's mom made them lunches, which, like, how nice would that be, right?
Oh,
Like,
I know. Like, how comfortable is that?
Yeah.
Like, you're living in higher comfort nearly than you would in dorms.
Right. So, but like, we, instead of worrying about us kind of ribbing him and giving him a hard time once in a while about like his, their mom making them lunches, which all of us are obviously jealous of. That's why we're making fun of him. But like, he took that money and invested a little bit in a plumbing company, and that plumbing company blew up because his friend, who, he picked a smart business partner. His friend really did a good job and blew that company up, and that company is now making him more, right? It's like the perfect financial story of not being pressured by your friends and like the people around you, surrounding yourself with people who have the same mentality, and then like the power that a business and entrepreneurship can bring you if you have the cash to be able to take advantage of a good opportunity.
Yeah. So it's that idea of luck is where preparation meets opportunity. If you're making the hard decisions now, so like at that younger age where it doesn't matter, guys, tough it out. You're in the military. You're a tough kid. Tough it out. Say no to these kind of situations. Build up that network and move yourself into a position where you can start taking advantage of these things when they happen. And wouldn't the nice thing just be to have that choice of, do I want to enlist for more time? Do I enjoy this? Is it something I really want to do? Or do I want to go pursue something else? Because the hard part for most people is they don't have that choice. Mm-hmm. It's a case of either I work or I go hungry, and that's not really much of a choice at all. So that ability to decide, I've had enough. The military is not an easy career from what I hear. I've never served myself, but mentally, physically, emotionally, like relationships, family, like I'm sure it can take its toll on all those things. And having the ability to say, you know what, I'm done. That's a huge choice, a great freedom to have.
Yeah. And really quickly, I'll make one point. No matter what you do, if you join the military, be always thinking about that question, which is, what am I educating myself to do after I leave? The military will not be there to take care of you when you get out, right? And there are too many guys who go through and they do a really great job at a job in the military that does not have a civilian equivalent, right? Like, the civilian equivalent is it's hard to go from being, an artillery specialist in the Marines to a job out in the outside that like needs that skill. There are not civilian artillery specialists in general, right? So you need to be thinking about like, what is my plan after the military? You should not get to the end of your enlistment and say, I have no choices. I have to re-enlist. Regardless of what the military is offering me, I have to re-enlist because I have no choices.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think that's a great place to finish this conversation. Any last advice, Stephen, for our potential people thinking about military in the future? So we could be talking to freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors. We could have parents of kids who are interested in military.
Yeah, no, like we said, just to kind of rehash a few things. One, think about the job you want to do and where you want to live. Mm-hmm. Google is a great resource. Google will tell you where the military bases are. They'll tell you what kind of jobs are in the military. And then find somebody who's either done that job or at least been in that service and chat with them. The other things I would say, we covered it a lot. If you decide to go into the military, one, have a plan, have a money plan, and then most importantly, to start saving something early. It can be a small amount, right? But start saving something early. A very wise person once told me the military is one of the places where you get every 2 years, you get a bonus regardless of your rank. And then you also make rank on very regular schedules. And they told me, save half of every raise you get. Because then you get
tomorrow.
Then you get to the benefit of feeling like you got a raise. But you also, whenever you decide to leave the military, you will have that nest egg that will take care of you. So
awesome.
Yeah,
and I will chip in that there are a lot of benefits outside of the military as well. So there are different retailers, different experiences you can do where there are military benefits. Like, educate yourself on what benefits are out there for you. You're doing a very difficult job to do. Like, it's not something that everybody can do. There are benefits and perks to doing that job, rewards, if you will. Make sure you know what those are. Make sure you're using those to the best of your ability to increase your financial situation. Doesn't mean you have to go spend on these things, but if there is a benefit available, why not take advantage of it?
Yeah. So the last thing I'll end with is there's a resource. It's called military1source.com. It's a private organization that kind of has official government backing, as being like a very official source of information. So a lot of these questions, a lot of the information is for those who are already in the military, but it has great information as well for those who are thinking about joining and some of the considerations. So that's, we'll put it in the notes, but www.military1source.com. And that is, if you want a place to start looking, that's the place to start.
Yeah, and keep an eye on the Choose a 5 Foundation. We will have a military financial guide coming out very soon.
Yes, we will.
All right, Stephen, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks.